we decided that we want to live in a alternating current society. So there's always going to be power conversion involved in that process.
Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome back to your podcast, the show where we do our best to rectify misinformation and give you the straight talk on how to build a future we all want to live in. This time, it's about an often unsung hero of the hydrogen economy, and without this workhorse, green hydrogen would not exist. And I'm not talking about the solar panels or the fuel cells. But before we get there, I'm your host, Lisa Ann Pinkerton. I'm the CEO of the award-winning Technica Communications and the founder of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability. Now, some of you might know that I was a former NPR and PBS environmental science reporter. I did that for over 12 years before I moved into the public relations space. And that didn't just teach me about reporting and production skills. It also taught me about fundraising skills. That's right. I know how to run a pledge drive. And while I haven't thought about doing that for Earthlings 2.0, I will ask you to consider how many shows you've listened to and how much that has enriched your life. Has it given you the insights you didn't have before? Has it made you smarter? Would you miss this show if it wasn't around? If you said yes to any of those questions, and if you said yes to all three, then you really get to be a member of our community officially. And that means becoming a Patreon member for $5 a month, less than what you would spend on lunch out, and support the good and talented people that make this show possible. Please follow the link in our show notes to become a member, and there's a t-shirt in it for you as well. Also, follow us on social media, drop us a few stars on the podcast app that you listen to, and please be active and give back. Today's away mission is to understand how power conversion technology, specifically rectifiers, are enabling us to build the green hydrogen economy. That was the workhorse I mentioned at the top of the show. Our guide on this mission is someone with over 2 decades of experience in the electrical power space. His name is Bryan Allen, and he's the Director of Hydrogen and Energy Storage with DynaPower. We caught up with him from his office in Charlotte, North Carolina.
So rectifiers are actually older technology that's been around quite some time. On a smaller scale, we use them in our TV sets every day, converting AC signals to DC signals to power our electronics. On a large scale, they're used in spaces like mining, electroplating, and things of that nature. And we've been in those segments for tens of years. It just so happens that developing and cultivating that technology has been an asset for the renewable space. So now we're deploying some of that same technology into renewables to include hydrogen.
When you're thinking about a hydrogen production system, where does the rectifier fit in the process? Let's take people from start to finish.
So let's take a green application that maybe would involve solar, something that you're very familiar with. So typically, if you have a solar signal coming in, that's a DC signal, then that would go through a PV inverter, which would convert that signal to AC. And then you would have, most likely in most cases, a AC source coming directly from the grid, as well as a AC signal coming from solar if you're looking at a green application. And then we convert that signal to a high voltage, high current DC signal to be deployed with an electrolyzer. And that in turn is, you're using that signal, that electricity to split water into hydrogen and also oxygen. So oxygen is emitted into the atmosphere, which is obviously clean. And the hydrogen is either stored or used in other applications.
So it sounds like the rectifier is like the liaison between the AC and DC needs of the electrolyzer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're their connector, right? We're marrying two worlds. Absolutely.
And so, are rectifiers only required when we're talking about green hydrogen or renewable energy sources?
Not necessarily. So until we started looking at clean hydrogen applications, rectifiers have been deployed in hydrogen production applications all over. So you could, for example, use a rectifier with hydrogen that's produced from methane. So it does not have to be a renewable source, although that's what we would like to see the world transition to.
The rectifiers, they're almost like, it seems like the unsung hero of the green hydrogen process, because you think about the energy source and you think about the electrolyzers, but you don't always think about this connector between the two. What do you think people should look for in a rectifier technology? Help us understand, what are some of the best practices?
Yeah, it really depends on your application. If you're emitting power directly to the grid, which we hope to see a lot more of that coming on soon, then one of the things that you want to be mindful of is not too much frequency variances. We like to call it noise on the grid in the industry. We make a unique rectifier that we call a chopper rectifier. Which, to not complicate things, it uses IGBT diodes that reduce the amount of noise and interference that would impact the grid. We're one of a few manufacturers that deploy that type of technology. We also make, standard thyristor-based rectifiers, which a lot of folks have that technology. In addition to that, we have inverters that we use in multiple spaces. We have an inverter that we can more or less use in reverse, and it becomes a smart rectifier application. So DynaPower has multiple topologies that we can deploy to fit your project or your application without hindering your ultimate end goal.
And we hear a lot about the sort of efficiency of the hydrogen process using electrolyzers and how much energy that electrolyzers require. And people say, oh, it takes a lot of power to create hydrogen with an electrolyzer. Are they also talking about the power that's required to run the rectifier?
Yes. So essentially you should view the electrolyzer as the power supply for an electrolyzer, right? So there's usually a large transformer on the front end feeding our equipment, and then we're feeding the electrolyzer. So there's multiple power sources involved, right? And running that equipment. And it's because of the high DC current that an electrolyzer requires to operate. So that requires a huge energy demand, right, to satisfy that need. The efficiencies that you will see with a typical electrolyzer, probably at best close to 70%.
So that means 30% of the energy is lost in the creation of the hydrogen? Correct.
If you're using hydrogen as a storage medium, which is a huge part of what we think the future holds for hydrogen, and we can get complicated. You start talking about round trip efficiencies, where you're talking about the power to convert hydrogen to maybe either liquid hydrogen or ammonia, and then convert it back to hydrogen when needed for your application. So when you start looking at round trip efficiencies, you're closer to 30% as opposed to that 70% if you're using it instantaneously.
So sounds like the hydrogen economy writ large has an opportunity to increase some of those efficiencies in the future.
Absolutely. I think globally there's initiatives happening to not only increase the efficiencies, but also take some of the cost of the materials out. There's some high cost components like uranium and platinum that are used in the manufacturing process of electrolyzers. And that's required because it's such a harsh environment to, if you think about water and deploying a high electrical current, there's not too many metals that can withstand, that type of harsh environment. So you do need some very expensive metals to manufacture electrolyzers, but we are seeing the costs come down. So certainly none of this would be possible without some incentives to not only bring the cost down, but offset the cost of manufacturing clean hydrogen on a large scale, much like what we experienced with the solar industry before it became cost competitive without incentives.
And one of the things that DynaPower is working on right now is a very large project called the Advanced Clean Energy Storage Hub in Delta, Utah. It's an industrial scale green hydrogen project. And I'm curious to know, what's your contribution to that project and what do you expect out of that?
So you're referring to the ACES project in Delta, Utah, which I might add, it's probably the largest utility scale hydrogen project in the U.S. currently. The construction is underway. We've actually already delivered the rectifiers to support that project. So as far as scale is concerned, it's a 220 megawatt project, so it's pretty large, and it's phase 1 of 4. So the ultimate goal is to approach close to a gigawatt of clean hydrogen that'll be produced at that site. One of the unique things about that site is hydrogen will be used and deployed as a blended fuel in gas turbines. So that will be part of the use case for hydrogen at that site, with the idea that the turbines will eventually become 100% operational based on hydrogen fuel alone. And you'll find there's also some changes happening in the gas turbine industry. That's one of the carbon fuels that's a huge part of the power that's produced on our grid. So if it's produced via a clean mechanism like wind or solar, then we'll have a clean fuel application as well.
So how big is that project, like acreage wise, or if you wanted to compare it to football fields, like how would we imagine it?
I can provide one interesting figure. So the salt caverns, which are going to be used to store the hydrogen on that project, there's multiple out there. Each cavern is at least the height of the Empire State Building. So that gives you an idea of the magnitude and the capacity of storing clean hydrogen underground for that project. So that's a unique component of that project. That's pretty interesting, I think.
And, when we talk about blending natural gas with the hydrogen, and then you mentioned there will be combustion process that powers some turbines. So that means that even if the energy source to create this hydrogen comes from a renewable resource, it does sound like there's going to be some emissions related to that project. Is that correct?
Initially, yes. So even if you blend hydrogen with natural gas at low percentages, we're talking 10 to 30%, there's a monumental reduction in carbon emissions. And then, as we mentioned before, the idea is to transition, right? Because we don't have the capacity currently to have hydrogen, one day just take over. It's going to have to be a transition period. So the thought there is that if you're talking specifically gas turbines, it's that you start with a blended fuel and then you slowly start increasing that amount until it's 100% hydrogen, which again, then the emissions would be minimal at that point.
In 10 years, where do you expect us to be in terms of adoption?
I think we're already on our way. There's been some monumental legislations that really have ushered in the use case for hydrogen. So if you're familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's been some great incentives that have been put into that bill that really ensure hydrogen is part of our future. There are 7 hubs, large hubs that will be built around the U.S. That will serve as large pilot applications. And when I say large pilots, they'll be production facilities that we're using hydrogen in multiple cases. Another thing that's unique about hydrogen is if you convert it to ammonia, for example, it could be transported around the world. So if you look at countries who want to move away from being dependent on foreign oil, hydrogen presents a clean option for those countries to either produce themselves or import it from net producers that are going to be entering the marketplace.
As long as it's made from a renewable source or perhaps a waste source where the emissions are captured, and any other energy that is used to convert the ammonia back to hydrogen comes from a renewable resource, right?
Absolutely. And there's several different technologies that are being looked at in addition to wind and solar, right? There's some biofuels that are also being looked at, but I think a lot of those technologies are much further behind wind and solar since they're proven technologies.
So now that we all know about rectifiers, because I think a lot of people didn't even have any idea that this is a component that was needed in the production of hydrogen.
Glad to bring you along. Join the ranks of most who've never heard of that. So that's makes for an interesting conversation, that's for sure.
Yeah, so what do you want people to remember about the rectifier as they continue down their own journey in understanding the hydrogen economy and helping to build it into something that is really useful to us as Earthlings?
So I would say in general, power conversion equipment is going to be essential to a carbon-free future, right? If you're dealing with wind and solar, you need an inverter to convert that DC source to AC. If you're dealing with electrolyzers, you need a source to convert from AC to DC, and get the right voltage and current for the electrolyzers to function properly. So at any point, if we're talking about reducing our carbon footprint, a key component of that process is going to be power conversion equipment. And it's just because we decided we wanted to live in an AC world when nature produces DC, right? The sun provides direct current, as does wind applications. And we decided that we want to live in a alternating current society. So there's always going to be power conversion involved in that process. And I'm proud to say that I think DynaPower makes the best rectifiers on the market.
So you're saying that if Thomas Edison had won the AC/DC argument against Nikola Tesla, that we might not need rectifiers because the entire grid would be in DC?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of these processes that we're talking about would be a lot less cumbersome and more straightforward to implement. But there's advantages all over, but certainly direct current is a little more straightforward.
Well, and back when they were having this argument, AC, the alternating current concept made a lot of sense. And so it was a great solution. But now that we're, generating power in a DC way, renewably, it begs the question if we still need AC.
I'm sure it'll be an interesting read, but I might add it's pretty late to turn back.
Earthlings, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into rectifiers, and I hope you geeked out on it as much as I did. If anything, a little bit more about the hydrogen economy and how green hydrogen is produced than most people, and you'll be a little bit smarter at that next climate cocktails happy hour that you go to. I appreciate how Bryan walked us through these various aspects and gave us some context on why we have them in the first place. And that digression around the Edison-Tesla AC/DC debate reminds me of this epic rap battle video between the two historical figures, satirically, of course. And so we're going to put that in the show notes because I just love that rap battle. I mean, all those epic rap battles are awesome. And if you haven't checked them out on YouTube, set yourself a good hour of time to just enjoy the heck out of them. Our faith in humanity is restored this week by scientists aboard the Schmidt Ocean Institute's Falkor 2 research vessel. Off of Costa Rica's Pacific coast, they have discovered not one, but 4 new octopus species. And these were discovered near hydrothermal springs in the deep sea. They found 2 octopus nurseries and a deep sea skate nursery. They collected over 160 specimens, and what makes this expedition special, beyond the fact that they identified 4 new species, is that they are storing these animals locally rather than shipping them off to US or Europe for examination. That's why this is novel. They're keeping the species in the country that they were discovered in. Now, it shouldn't be novel. That should be normal, but it hasn't been normal, and that's why this is so special. We thank Dr. Beth Orcutt from the Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences and Dr. Jorge Cortez of the University of Costa Rica for co-leading this expedition and expanding our understanding of the miraculous biodiversity that can be found in even the harshest environments on this beautiful blue-green space flower that we call home.